This is a Powered Up Podcast, show number 14.
Maybe there was a storm. So how can we figure that out? So that's what they thought. Maybe there's a storm, but how can we figure out if there was a storm? And so they're like, we could Google the town on that day and we could find out the weather report. And I'm like, okay. So then they do it. So they're independently coming up with the ideas. And then they're like, okay, they're running over to the other group and they're like, okay, we found this article. Did you find one? It's like this buzz of activity. And like you said, they're developing critical thinking skills, problem solving. And we know we have a whole lot of things going on in our world that need problem solvers.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
What's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, as always, Mr. Matt, the fact checker Rogers. Matt, how are we feeling tonight?
I am great. I'm excited to be here. We just got done with an awesome interview, and so we're excited for you to jump into it, but I'm sure you have some questions for me to start off before we get into it.
Yeah, it was a great interview. We had the chance to talk to Soule, who is the 2021 Maine Teacher of the Year. So Matt, to kick things off, like you said, what is something that you have taught your students that you didn't really know much about, or you didn't necessarily know, quote unquote, the answers to?
To be honest, it had been a long time since I taught fourth grade, or done fourth grade before teaching fourth grade. I mean, I'd gone through high school and college, and I revert back to a lot of the things that I know that I probably saw or had in my early elementary years. But science curricular areas always blow me away every time I teach them. I feel like they go out of my brain until the next year that I teach them, which can be really uncomfortable. Sorry, I don't know why I paused there.
I was really confused.
As an instructor, especially every time that we teach something, we get so invested in what we're teaching that for instance, we're teaching fractions right now, and the idea of talking about number sense is something I know that we covered, but it's not at the forefront of my brain right now. And I think in the interview, we actually talk about inquiry learning quite a bit. And I know, Ken, there's this concept of inquiry is a really risky type of teaching strategy. And it's one of those things that I don't feel like a new teacher should try it, but a teacher should try it as soon as they feel comfortable to try it, if that makes sense. If I'm a brand new teacher, yeah, you kind of have to go through the repetition and you have to work on behavior management and the ebbs and flows of everything. But the moment that you can transition to inquiry-based learning, which we'll talk about plenty in the interview, it is the absolute, it is what we dream education to be when it all works. But it's kind of risky, right? Do you have any kind of contribution to that?
It is risky. And I think I mentioned this in your view. It's a challenge to be confident to really just open those doors. But Cindy really gives us a lot of practical ways to incorporate it into your classroom, regardless of your content area, and really building those cross-curricular experiences. And what I would say is, my advice would just be to embrace the fact that you're providing the students the opportunity to learn. Our goal is to coach students on how to learn your content. Whether you are an elementary teacher and you teach all subjects and it's just the love of learning, or you're a secondary teacher and you're specialized, the goal isn't for them to know your content. The goal is for them to be able to learn and utilize your content. And building that in an inquiry sense is one of the best things you can do. I tried a Genius Hour 20% time project a couple years, and one year I had students that wanted to learn Spanish. If you paid attention in the show last week, show 13, I don't know any Spanish. And so I had to find resources for them to learn. I actually connected with a fellow Teacher of the Year finalist whose wife taught Spanish. She Zoomed with the kids. I just allowed them to take that opportunity to explore that project and that idea. And my goal was just to manage it and help facilitate it and help create that opportunity. And so Cindy really gives us practical ways to do that in the classroom. So I 100% agree. When you see inquiry-based learning happen successfully, it's the best.
Well, and I think the hard part, really the danger, as I guess I would classify it, is when you start inquiry-based learning, you are taking a risk where you are stepping away from your control. And us as educators love control. But real learning happens when the kids are doing the work. I can talk. I know our first interview with Mike Creed talked about, hey, I taught that lesson really well, but did the kids learn the lesson really well? And I think about that frequently. The hardest part with inquiry is you have the first attempt and you give up some control, and then that leads to further questioning, which only dives you deeper into turning the keys over to the kids to really drive the direction. And that's, again, super uncomfortable. You have to feel like you have a great culture and rapport with kids. You have to feel like you can control their behavior management. And really, honestly, I feel like I was only able to do it when I could purposely drive my kids up, almost like agitate them and get them bouncy, and then know that I could also settle them as quickly. And that was the true sign of, okay, we can actually try this if you're responding to those type attributes. But again, it's one of those things, if you can do it, it is the style. You get end results that are well beyond. I know I mentioned this in the interview, kids have a ton of time available to them that we don't have. So if I can spare them from playing Fortnite or Minecraft and they're going to choose a school activity to continue research on, that is the ultimate goal. And I think that's what you get when you do inquiry-based learning, a lot of times, creating excitement where there might not have been.
Yeah, and the reality is when you do it a few times, you become more comfortable and confident with it. You're going to end up teaching all the lessons you always taught. You're just going to do it when the students are ready for it. So it's a little bit more small group. It's a little bit more of the mini lesson style. But you're still going to teach them all those lessons that you always do and you know is important for them. But it's going to happen in a moment where they see the value and importance of it. So let's jump into this interview. It's fantastic. So let's connect now with Cindy Soule, the 2021 Maine Teacher of the Year. Hi, Cindy. How are you? Welcome to the podcast. We are super excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So to kick things off, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience, where you're located, where you're from, and just what your teaching journey has looked like thus far, kind of in a snapshot.
Sure. So I teach in Portland, Maine. Portland is one of Maine's largest cities, and I teach at the Gerald D. Talbot Community School, which is also one of Maine's most diverse schools. I teach fourth grade, and I am the 2021 Maine Teacher of the Year, and it is my, interestingly enough, 21st year of teaching. I joined the education field later. I had graduated from college. I worked as a social worker, and then I also briefly was in the armed forces. I went to boot camp and in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and was just doing this special program where I could see if it was a fit. And there were many aspects of it that was great. And then I decided to pursue a different field and decided that wasn't what I wanted to do, but it was exciting. And so after all of that, I started a family and got my master's in education, and I was an intern at the school where I currently teach. And I just remember walking through the doors and just falling in love with the community. And I've really appreciated being there and beginning as a special educator and then transitioning to kindergarten and a little time in third grade. And now fourth grade is my home, and I love it.
Excellent. I always think teachers that are in some sort of career before they get into education have so much just life experience to offer, because teachers that take the traditional path, it's you're in public ed or private ed, you go to school, and then you are in school. And we talk a lot about preparing kids for real life. You expect this in real life, but I kind of like to joke that a lot of teachers have not really experienced, for lack of a better term, real life. So what would you say are some of the key things that you learned through your other experiences before getting into education that really permeate in your career still?
I would say leaving Maine and going into the military and having that experience was incredible. I was home, away from home for the first time for that duration of time. I was educated, I got my undergrad in Maine, and so I hadn't really been away from home. And I was also, in just a strange environment where everything that I had been familiar with was changed. And I really had to develop some grit. I really had to push through some really hard moments. Shooting an M16 is not anything I ever imagined myself doing. And it made me really uncomfortable, but it was really powerful. And going into a gas chamber and experiencing having to taking my mask off and experiencing tear gas, like those were really challenging moments. And I really learned to have intention and purpose behind everything that I did after that. So I left that experience and I came back and I was working as a social worker in a nursing facility. And, that message of intention and purpose kept following through as I was supporting patients and their families. And one nursing facility had children that were wards of the state. They were very, very medically fragile, and special educator was coming in and providing services. And I found myself gravitating there. And it was that intention and purpose that really called me back to go and get my master's in education.
So to follow up that, I think obviously prior experience, and one of the best things is, again, we've talked to some subject matter experts that kind of pursued the field before they were in education, and then obviously bring that expertise into the classroom. And to be kind of a social and public servant in many ways, as in the military as well as social work and in this special ed field, it really allows you to look at the human that sits in front of you, the many of them, as so much more than just curriculum receivers. I guess you have to bring a lot of real world experience and a lot of thought and consideration. So when maybe stepping back and saying the beginning of the year, I'm sure there's lots of things that you want to just rush to share and learn about kids. What are some of those first few things that you prioritize, either about you sharing to create comfort for the kids, or that you want to learn from the kids so that you can better serve them as soon as possible at the beginning of the year?
Well, I love that you're asking this question because it is so critical to establish that classroom community. And I just really, my goal for the beginning of the year is to have a lot of laughter. And we do that in different ways. Some get to know you games and some different things. But also, just I find by sharing laughter together, it kind of creates this atmosphere where students also begin to share the things that they really are passionate about. And so I try and share my passion, which is the outdoors and the natural world, and share the things that I love to do. And in doing so, I hope that I can learn what my students are passionate about and be able to help inspire them to be able to pursue their interests in their classroom, and let them know that it is a place where everyone is valued. And once that happens, then this just amazing experience happens where you have a learning community where people feel safe and welcome and are willing to take risks.
I love that, and that's, I know Matt is that way, and that was the approach that I was always taking with my students. When you've established that community in your classroom, can you share perhaps a specific lesson or activity that you do where you see the students' willingness to take risks kind of come out in those activities?
Well, I really love doing identity work and having kids really feel comfortable sharing about who they are. So often I like to have a read aloud where, like this fall, I read the story of Wangari Maathai, who was the first Black woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and we did an identity map of her. So we studied, and she's this amazing woman who became this biologist and helped reforest Kenya. And and then once students see this are able to like put this woman's identity down and see all these different things, it really helps open up their ability to say more than like I'm a brother or a sister. And not that those things aren't important, but that they really start to share. It's those passions. It's the things that are really particular. And one of my students shared early on that he dreamed of being a pilot. And so I was able to contact the FAA, and he's had some time with a pilot. And April 12th and 13th, the pilots are coming back because we're in a systems unit and we're studying energy, and they're going to talk about the system of a plane and then connect it to the system of an airport. And so this student, by sharing that, now gets to come back to this pilot and introduce these pilots to his class and his grade level. It's really exciting.
So, as a fellow fourth grade teacher, I am super excited, and we will be joining. No, I think one of the things that I just want to point out, and I don't want to take anything away from you, Cindy, but I know Ken and I, when we sat down, Ken had the idea to reach out to the country's best educators. And you are our first official state winner, Teacher of the Year. But one of the things that I want to point out is it seems to me that through these conversations we've been blessed to have in this podcast, you hear a lot of educators share very simple tips. Like you introduced this podcast saying that your priority at the beginning of the year is laughter. And one of the benefits there is creating comfort, creating culture, creating community. And what I think is so impressive is it's so much, I guess what I'm trying to say is, from your perspective, you just feel like you're doing the best thing for kids. And you view the content and the subject matter as ways that you can present ideas to kids based off their interests. So a student that's interested in flying, go to an actual subject matter expert, and you are consistent and you use all of your resources to provide that. I just think there's an element of saying to anyone, we have an audience predominantly of pre-service teachers. There are future Teacher of the Year that really it comes down to consistency, using the resources you have, recognizing probably your own boundaries and where you can pull other people in. So if you were to kind of say to yourself as early teacher, Cindy, what would you kind of say are your priorities to get to the position that you are, which you deserve every bit of credit you have right now?
Well, I really believe that a teacher's superpower is their belief in students. And if you have an unwavering belief and a commitment to your students, things are going to happen in your classroom that are magical. And if you have that, you're going to create, your commitment to that is going to help create this community where students start believing in each other and students start celebrating each other's success. And so if that is what your foundation is built upon, no matter what curriculum, because we're constantly getting new information, new research, new knowledge about how to best teach children. And so, but the foundation of believing in your students has never changed. So just if you have that at your core and back to the intention and purpose, and you say, okay, with this lesson, what is my intention? What is my purpose? And you're going to be, there's going to be pressure about getting through curriculum and all of the pacing, and just keep going back to, okay, I believe in my students. I know they can be successful. What is the intention and purpose behind this lesson? And I'm not saying slow down the curriculum if it feels hard. I'm saying, what can you do to help the children meet that curriculum where it is at? Or, how can you advocate if you do need extra time because you know your students? But just hold that true to yourself as you navigate through all of the avenues, and I think you'll be successful.
And I think just to kind of mirror and just share, like, I think you make it sound very simple, but from a teacher, we're recording this in the end of March and I'm exhausted. But I think that the simple concept of purpose keeps on coming up, right? Like the purpose of me teaching today, of this math lesson, of this problem, it's really to give a gateway of understanding to the kids that will allow them to unlock. And when you create opportunities for them to see that pathway or have motivation to get through the thick stuff, that's really cool. Yeah, I think, I'm sure that you never have a wasted moment in your classroom, but I'm sure there's just so much to the, hey, I'm considering all these features, my prior background, the kids' interests, the curriculum, my school's values and priorities, the time of the year, all of those features. And I'm sure you just do an amazing job managing that. And when it comes down to aligning what those priorities really are.
Well, and like you said, Matt, it is simple in the sense of these are the key things, but one of the hardest parts of that is the confidence to do it. And to
Absolutely.
know that you might be breaking the grain at times, and not even breaking the grain of what your district expects, breaking the grain of what you did the previous year or the previous week. I mean, I can remember a class, I would give the same, I called it my unit -1 in math. And it were skills that I knew the students needed to have, that they in theory should have learned in 4th grade to be successful throughout the year in 5th grade. And I gave the same assessment every year I taught 5th grade. And I had one year where the scores were much lower than anything I had ever seen, significantly lower. And so I spent the first month just doing like a boot camp of math skills that I knew they needed. And so I was significantly behind, but come April, I wasn't, because I was able to go at a little bit of a quicker pace after that, because I had really solidified the skills that those students needed. And so, it just takes that confidence to believe in yourself. And like you said, Cindy, believe in the students. And when you overtly believe in those students, and you truly do believe in those students, they feel it, they see it, they work harder for you. Matt, you said your kids would run through walls for you because there's that genuine belief in that. So I don't want to cut this topic off, but you said you taught kindergarten. We have to talk about kindergarten. What is being a kindergarten teacher like in, let's say, one sentence, for those that are secondary listeners that maybe are sweating just thinking about teaching kindergarten, and for even our elementary teachers that
I'm not
dropped down to that, have not dropped down to the world of kindergarten.
It is so joyful, and I sing and dance even in 4th grade. It's kind of my thing. So I find that that's where that really developed, is the singing and dancing, because K students, they just think you're so cool.
Mm.
There's lots of tapping and tugging and, tying of shoes and those things. And there are moments where you feel like you're herding cats. But, it is a really unique place. And I will say it is incredible to see someone's learn to read for the first time and read a book independently. It is quite amazing. I do miss it. I was really sad to leave, but then I went to third grade and I was like, this is amazing. Kids are so independent. And now I think even at fourth grade, it's.
It is definitely hard to go down in grade levels, especially like that third grade is the cutoff in the elementary world. I started my career teaching second grade, and I absolutely loved second grade. I loved being with those kids. But after being in fifth for a while, it was harder to imagine going back to second or even, thinking about first. But seeing that joy of kids learning to read, I can only imagine. I never experienced that. I'll have to wait for my own children to be old enough for that. So are there any specific teaching strategies other than the singing and dancing, which I think is great, that you felt carried over from kindergarten successfully to fourth grade that you maybe feel is an advantage for you that you taught that primary age?
Well, I definitely think having the foundational knowledge of reading and the acquisition of, the phonemic awareness in those pieces is really helpful. Particularly, I work, so we have 50% English learners, which somebody recently taught me to say linguistically gifted, and I love that as opposed to
That's cool.
English learners. And so, it's been incredibly helpful for me when a newcomer comes to the United States and comes into my classroom. I'm really able to support their literacy development. But I would also say that, independence is incredibly important, and getting, 5-year-olds to be independent. I would say that I really had strong classroom management skills and, just had a lot of structures and routines that I feel are really helpful for even fourth graders.
Can you give us one of those?
So it's just a matter of in the beginning of the school year when you're setting up your classroom and you're beginning to organize how you want your day to go, just setting kids up and letting them practice even just something simple as hanging their backpack up and just so that kids can see how the day goes and the expectations, just modeling those clear expectations of those routines of every little thing, where our materials are kept. And then it just creates that culture where, students are reminding each other to push in their chairs. It's just making sure everyone's clear about what those expectations are.
And then tapping into them throughout the year as they start to kind of push those boundaries and just saying, I know that especially this time of year, I find myself having to revisit as if we didn't have, especially in those unstructured times, walking the hallway, the volume in the cafeteria, those type conversations start to creep in.
Matt, what would you say is, I want to throw one at you, Matt. What would you say is one of your best classroom management strategies, activities, or things that you have used year in and year out that definitely pay off?
Okay, so this is maybe not the best one, but one that I always thought was funny is, so I share all materials. It's a little bit different this year. So I got rid of all my desks. This is a conversation Ken and I had. So all spaces were collaborative. I had different types of desks. I had different types of tables. Some were 2-seaters, some were 6-seaters. It didn't matter, and they had some freedom. But the currency that I had in my classroom were pencils. So they would have their own pencil and they would travel with their own pencil, and everything else would be shared. And so one of my favorite things was everything was to earn a bonus pencil. Now, mind you, if they worked their way down and had to replace it, it had to be in this range, but it was that responsibility of maintaining their resource, which was a pencil. The best part of it is they were so psyched to get a new pencil that I didn't have to do anything extra. So it was one of those things that I wouldn't necessarily suggest the pencil trick, but like if a pencil hit the floor, I would take the pencil and they wouldn't have it. So they'd have to go into their resource. Again, probably not what you're looking for, but I often think about that being such a, we don't need to go in behavior management or PBIS and buy the latest, greatest things. The kids found an incredible value in something so necessary for their learning that everyone valued their pencil and saw the value of someone else getting a pencil. And I always found that really an interesting thing of, if you as I mean, we're actors and we are just the main show. A lot of times we are the guides through it. I made a big deal about that at the beginning of the year and maintained it because they actually fed off it. And then it didn't connect anymore. So you try something else. You don't stay rigid, especially as it doesn't work anymore. I know that's another kind of portion of Kristen, my wife, who's a fourth grade teacher in my district, teaches with me. We have different classes, and it's one of those things that we'll have classes that we have to do 3 or 4 different complete, hey, whole class, boys only, girls only, individual students, just constantly revisiting that intrinsic motivation, what you can create.
Yeah, my class this year, it's stickers. So they have their reading journals, and if they're doing doing great work or whatever, I'll just go around and I'll have like this new sticker, and they never know what it's going to be. And so their whole front of their reading notebooks are covered with stickers, and they get so jazzed about it. It hasn't lost its thing yet. And then that reminded me, our school-wide PBIS is doing, we're on the Talbot Tigers, and they're earning their stripes. And so they've bought just the rubber bracelets, just simple rubber bracelets. And so the kids are working towards points, and they get each points they get up, like 100 points, you get a blue one, and 200 points, you get a purple one. And so they're trying to get their tiger stripes, and they're incredibly motivated by that. It was a really great school-wide effort.
Can you real quick, and I have a 2-part question for you. So kind of tap into PBIS for people that aren't familiar with it, and maybe if you have an integrated role. And I'd also say that I would imagine, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble by any means, but you being Teacher of the Year has to draw a lot of attention within your school community. And I could see how there are 2 routes of either being really embraced and supported by your teammates, or, man, jealous, or whatever the case may be. I would imagine it's the first, because we don't get there or to a position like that alone. Can you talk about building structure and community from the kids' end, but also the support system you have and what makes it such a successful environment for you?
So, working at a school that serves an underserved population, we have been through some really tough challenges. Like I said, I've been there 21 years, and to have been a part of this energy and movement of just trying new things and really continually looking and saying, okay, this is working, this isn't working. And we had to really become comfortable teaching in front of one another. And as people have left and new people have come in, it seems to have increased the culture of collaboration. I believe wholeheartedly, and our school believes wholeheartedly, in collective efficacy, meaning that, we all share this common vision, and we are all working towards, and our vision is to narrow that opportunity gap. And so everything that we do as a collective school is around that. And so when I was awarded and earned the Maine Teacher of the Year, I felt really proud that I was able to share the story of Talbot Community School, and that I was able to share the amazing, wonderful brilliance of my students. And so part of that layer that you were talking about, the PBIS, positive behavioral intervention supports, is a lot to say, but really it's what we were talking about in the beginning with your own classroom community and extending that beyond. and adding this layer of social emotional support. So one of the things that's happened at my school is we have common corners in each classroom. And it's just a small space where students have tools. And again, when you're putting all these really cool tools in there, it's just you set up a structure and kids know how to use them. And so there, my common corner has drawing pad and markers and different things in there. And then they have squish balls, and there's like laminated pages that they can turn to do figure eights or whatever that is needed to calm. And then beyond that, the students have a timer, and when the timer's done, they know to check back with me. And if they're not feeling ready to get back to work, then there's support for me, and I call, and the student also gets support. And so that way, the students know that if they're not able to access the learning before they reach a point where they might make a poor choice, there's all these structures in place that help them. And there's also a blue room, which is this amazing room with these big squishy balls. And so students have access to that. So sometimes when an adult does come, the blue room might be an option for the students to use. But, and even in my own team level, if I'm struggling with a student, I can pop my head next door and say, such and so I think might need a break in a different room. And so it's just this whole idea of our whole community just really rallies around each other, and we're all just really wanting to help our students achieve their fullest potential. And, that's the belief in students. That's having an instructional vision. And, I could talk about science too, because that's my big tool in my back pocket is inquiry and questions and curiosity.
We'll go there
next.
That's
a whole nother layer to all of this. But I think these other pieces and parts are really, really critical to making those inquiry pieces happen.
And before we get there, I just want to just kind of add to it. Tonight I actually just got done dressed up in a Easter Bunny outfit, as we had probably 150 families from a school of 400 kids come through because our district unfortunately canceled our school-wide or district-wide Easter event. But one teacher chose to still have an experience for kids in a safe environment. And I just want to add, that was through our PBIS. It was a belief that something that the kids look forward to every year still needed to be there. And I just want to encourage, obviously, Cindy, you're doing an incredible job so far, but like anyone listening that myself, Cindy, we do some great things because we created the permission to do these great things, and our district supports that. And I think that under PBIS, one of the things that I feel like has empowered me that I've been so grateful for was I'm allowed to suggest ideas of how I think it would help the community beyond just the academics, beyond just the behavior management. It's the whole school spirit. And so there's definitely behavior modifications and adjustments, but it's also, hey, I've made probably 15 videos and I've run assemblies in my entire building, and we're doing drive-throughs. That there is a huge benefit, and I think the power of being a teacher is, yes, we have the direct responsibility, but it makes our lives so much easier when kids love being at school, every aspect of school. And so creating that pride and like you're saying, leaning into and tapping into the teacher next door or even the kindergarten. I went down to teach a science lesson to the kindergartners last week because we were continuing a lesson that we'll do in fourth grade as well on ecosystems. There is permission for people that are motivated to do awesome things for kids. And I think, Cindy, that's something that you've granted and created an awareness, and whether it's under PBIS or other reasons, everyone can be encouraged to do so as well.
Absolutely. And I just want to throw in that although this conversation with PBIS may sound elementary, this is not an elementary conversation. We have a middle school in our district that has fully endorsed the PBIS program. They have the online application where the kids are earning points and buying stuff. So this is absolutely impactful for any level in public education. And like you both have said, that the community part of it is so important. And I love, Cindy, how you were talking about how the kids set a timer for themselves and check in with you. Anytime we can help the students be advocates for themselves, to monitor their behavior and to monitor how they're feeling, if they're calmed down or not, or they're ready to learn, or whatever the case is, I think is so important, because it's our job to support those students and to give them the skills and to make sure that they are okay and they are ready. But at the same time, it's our job to empower them to be able to do it on their own, because at some point they're going to have to. So let's jump into inquiry. I'm just going to throw the topic at you. To hit us with what you love about it, what it looks like in your classroom. And I'm going to guess that it relates to reading, and you're bringing in that literacy component too.
You're exactly on point. So like I said, I've been really motivated to help my students achieve their fullest potential. And so there are all these layers. So there was becoming an expert at reading, really getting our math curriculum where we wanted it to be, the SEL work, all of those pieces, adding in technology. Like, our literacy team fought hard, and we got one-to-one laptops for our 3rd through 5th grades and iPads for K to 2. But still, we were still about 35% proficient in reading, which is unacceptable. I heard somebody recently call that a epidemic of unfulfilled potential. And that has really stuck with me. I think it was British Robinson, who works for the Barbara Bush Foundation. I'm not exactly positive on her name, but there's a really good report, through the Nations of Readers, if anybody's interested. But anyway, so I was working, and I was leading a professional learning community for 3rd through 5th grade teachers, and we were looking at all of our student work and thinking, okay, what is missing? And so we started to figure out that it was we were doing too much talking. We were doing these mini lessons and then having the kids go into this unstructured time, into all these book choices. And, we really, like you said, we gave ourselves permission to use the curriculum we were being asked to do, but also use the data we were getting from our students, and realize that when kids have questions and they're curious and they're learning about the world around them, it's like so engaging and motivating, and they want to read to find the answers to questions. And so in the last 3-4 years, I've really been working to understand how to implement NGSS design and practice, and launching my units with a mystery, a phenomenon that's puzzling. And really, I become a navigator of the students' learning, and they use their reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. They collaborate together. They create models to explain this phenomenon in the world. So like right now, we're figuring out about a blackout because we're in an energy conversions unit. But before that, there's just been a series of different phenomena. But it's been really, really exciting to see. And last year, right before the pandemic, we did get some access testing in for our English language learners. And typically, I think we have I think the most that had ever tested out in 4th grade was 8, and we had 15 of 23 students last year demonstrate English language proficiency, which was just phenomenal. And it really leads me to believe that the amount of motivation. So we didn't get the standardized testing measures, and I'm not a proponent of that, but I do believe that if in my community students can show proficiency, then all students should be able to show proficiency. And I think sometimes we're spending so much time saying something's wrong with the test, which there are things, but we also need to say where's the rigor that helps students then transfer what they're learning. And for me, it's immersing students in the content of the real world, science and social studies.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a huge proponent of standardized tests, but when you see significant increases like that, whether it's Faunus and Pinnell, the state standardized test, Dibbles, whatever you're assessing them on, even just your district benchmarks, I mean, there is validity in it when you can compare it over the course of multiple years. Evaluating growth versus comparing the year to year. There's all those conversations, but at the end of the day, when you're seeing significant growth like you described, there's evidence in that. And inquiry is something that is extremely challenging, I think, to kind of get started with. But once you experience a classroom where you are facilitating an inquiry-based lesson, an inquiry-based unit, I feel like it completely opens your eyes. One I did with my fifth graders was, and I may have talked about this before, we had a unit on biomes. And when I first started, I only taught math and reading, and then it switched to teaching all the subjects. And I was given a lot of resources of presentations on all the biomes. And I thought, well, what if they don't care about this bird that I'm presenting on? Or what if they don't care about this whatever? Like, I just want them to learn about how animals adapt and survive in the environment, and the same with the plants. And so I converted it to a unit completely research-based. They had criteria they had to learn of every biome, and then they created videos like Steve Irwin, like they were in the biome, and I built in some video skills and that type of thing. But, between the research, the scripting, and filming 10 times, they knew that content like the back of their hands because they were so immersed in it, and they were talking about the bird that they thought was interesting or the type of animal or plant that they found interesting, not the 10 that I chose. And so, when you're able to create those inquiry-based opportunities, like you said, they care. They're interested in reading, and they're actually going to read. I mean, there are times where I don't want it to sound harsh, but I also want to remind teachers, like, they didn't necessarily choose to be in this class. They didn't necessarily choose to learn this unit. It was decided for them. So if they're not interested, let's find a way to make them interested. Matt, do you have any inquiry-based lessons, topics that you love to roll out?
I guess what I often say is the acquisition-based learning is what I like to call it, at least with my kids. It's, hey, you're going to need to learn this for this purpose. So I provide a problem. What do you need to do to not say, I can't do this? Right now, I really need to learn this. So you have the freedom to go learn that, whether it's YouTube, whether it's general research skills. Because unfortunately, what's difficult to have conversations with other teachers is they do have many items that can provide them the support to get those answers. They need to be proficient at finding them and replicating or understanding what they mean. And so if we can embed that, I remember we had, I can't remember his name, but he talked about the search engine.
Rhett?
No, it wasn't right. It was from a teacher long ago from teaching, but it's a search engine for mathematic equations. So everything is based off of mathematic equations, and it's essentially a Google, but you type in a problem and it provides the answer. And so I remember sitting and he said, "So this is here, it's available. Are you going to act like it's not there? You know that 7 of your classmates are going to have it and figure it out and have the answer, and all you ended up teaching them was how to type it into the search box? Or do you use that to roll into actual learning? They're going to have access to those answers very directly, kind of like we would flip to the back of a math textbook and just copy down the answers. So this acquisition-based learning, I think, is huge. I do it in, I know Ken and I talked about our $1 million house project. Okay, so we're adding and subtracting. We're doing geometry. We're doing surface area. We need to talk about why are we talking about square meters instead of just meters when we talk about area? And why does it matter to you? Because you're going to make a big difference when you buy these materials at the wrong amount. And so when you build in that intrinsic motivation through inquiry or access-based learning, the teaching does itself. They learn it so much deeper, and so much more real that, like you kind of said, Cindy, seeing kindergartners learn to read, it's kind of like seeing kids acquire something that they know they're going to need for a lot longer than just your class period.
Definitely. Cindy, so when you're facilitating these lessons, you clearly have a very diverse population of students. So what are some key strategies or things you're putting excuse me, things you're putting into your lesson to really scaffold, differentiate, and support your students to be successful?
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was launching with a phenomenon. So you launch with this mysterious phenomenon. So there was this town that had this blackout, and we are going to become systems engineers, and we need to figure it out. So right there, they're all having a shared experience, and they're all students are able to bring their background knowledge from their, whatever life experiences they've had. And they together start to think, okay, what could it be? And then they ask a next question. So it's really them working together to figure out the answer to this phenomenon. And as they build each piece, then they put all the parts together and figure it out. And so that's the other layer. It's students working collaboratively and having rich discussions. And then I say, okay, so you have this question, like, maybe there was a storm. So how can we figure that out? So that's what they thought. Maybe there's a storm, but how can we figure out if there was a storm? And so they're like, we could Google the town on that day and we could find out the weather report. And I'm like, okay. So then
That's
they do
awesome.
it. So they're independently coming up with the ideas. And then they're like, okay, they're running over to the other group and they're like, okay, we found this article. Did you find one? It's like this buzz of activity. And like you said, they're developing critical thinking skills, problem solving. And we know we have a whole lot of things going on in our world that need problem solvers, people who can create solutions, people who can work collaboratively. And when they disagree, they can work it out. So that's another really important part of this is kids being able to problem solve. Well, I wanted to be the recorder. Well, you got to get over that. And they figure out those ways. And the final strategy that I think is really critical, we know that writing can often hold our students back because maybe they have a really quick processing speed and getting their ideas down onto paper because the physical task of writing is really arduous. But by having students have the option to use words and pictures and labels to model their explanations, you should see these beautiful models that kids produce. So they draw pictures to explain, and then they have labels and they also, I don't necessarily teach the vocabulary, they teach it to each other. And so somebody's like, oh, you're talking about the system, that's called a circuit. And then they're like, oh, and then they're all like, yeah, it's a circuit. It's all like wanting to use the language. And then those models help them really transfer their thinking into more formal written responses.
Cindy, can you kind of to tap into? I know Ken and I have talked about when you do use inquiry-based learning, the end result is so much better than what you ever would have even dreamt because it's to the creativity and also the time available to your students. I know from my end, I make a baseline model. We've joked about it before. You have strict regulations and you have 18 of the exact same project. I did a flashlight project I've referenced before where I showed a Pringles can, and that year I had 18 Pringle can flashlights because I kind of narrowed their perspective when I had too many hard fixed guidelines. But in this inquiry-based learning, the kids just absolutely explode with end products. Can you talk to any of those successes? I know that was a huge seller for me of inquiry based when I saw how much further and how much deeper combined that the kids took their activities.
Yeah, so your Pringle can reference made me think of we're creating wind turbines
Hmm.
because they're trying to create a solution for this town. They figured out that there were too many, one possibility of the blackout is there were too many devices taking the energy away. And so they're trying to think of other solutions because they can't add power to the power plant. They already figured that part out. And so they're creating these wind turbines, and there's a lot of frustration, right, that goes into into trying to build something, build a structure. And this goes back to the engineer design process. And so I have seen that students, it doesn't become competitive. It becomes, if I figure something out, I'm going to share it with you. And they've made these very elaborate wind turbines. We test it on a fan, and we see how many pennies in a cup it can raise, and we time it, and to see how effective their wind turbine is. And it's been really amazing to see some kids who sometimes lack that push and motivation to work through hard things, to really develop that sense. So we use illustrative math, and it's a really challenging program. This is our first year transitioning to that, and kids were really feeling that. Plus, we had the spring that we had, so they're coming, having, and so the transference that I see is that through the, working through these problems in science, through being totally motivated, through supporting each other there, I also see it in math. Okay, so we're doing some really hard math problems, and I'll see someone lean over and be like, "Don't worry, you've got this." And then I'll see another kid, get up and be like, "Oh, can I help?" And then they're teaching each other math. And I gotta tell you, fourth grade boys can communicate better to fourth grade boys sometimes than I can, or girls, or whoever. It's just like they can communicate to each other in ways that sometimes adult talk doesn't always help. And it's really been a beautiful thing to see kids be able to push through and have grit. And that's what, life is hard. There are going to be so many challenges. And so to be able to have that to take and carry forward, I think it's been really amazing.
Well, that's great, and it circles back to exactly what you said earlier. You learned what you learned before you got into education. You said grit, and now you're developing those experiences in your classroom for the kids to feel that grit and to develop that grit themselves. So I want to jump into the lesson lens, but Matt, did you want to offer something real quick before
a few points? I have been fact checking. So you referenced British Robinson, who works for Barbara Bush. You were correct. She talked about America's facing a silent crisis. It's time to address low literacy, which is awesome. There's plenty on her. Phenomenal. The math.
We'll link to that in the show notes, so make sure you save that, Matt.
Absolutely. The math search engine is called Wolfram Alpha. Wolfram Alpha. And so you literally type in, and it's a numerical version of a Google search. So I've used it in the past for like timelines and what happened on this date, but you can use it for complex math problems. It'll show you a step-by-step, and I think, I could be wrong, but they have almost a Khan Academy equivalent starting to show the step-by-step process for instruction, which is another great resource for you. The last thing that I want to talk about that you mentioned was, you just said it, related to, I'll have to wait on it. I apologize.
All right. That's all right. So we will we'll jump into our lesson lens. I've literally called it something different every time. I can't think of good alliteration here, Matt. I'm really struggling.
It works.
You're gonna, Cindy, you're just gonna share something, specific lesson or unit, back and forth questions between Matt and I that we ask all our guests. So the first question is this a unit overview, long-term project, or a single lesson?
I would say it's a unit overview.
All right. And grade level, I'm assuming, is fourth grade. But is there a specific subject area that you narrow it down to, or is it specific with the time frame of the year?
It is a specific subject. Do you want me to tell you what it is?
Not yet.
Okay.
What are the objectives of the unit? And you can share the subject too.
Okay. So it is a Wabanaki Studies unit, and it was a third grade unit that was developed And the objective is for students to learn about the indigenous people of Maine.
That's very cool. Um, so, if you were to talk about this unit, especially going along with this inquiry based, what would you describe as the students' responsibilities, or what are they actively doing throughout this lesson? Maybe if you were to take us from the seat of one of your desks.
So students begin by studying maps of Maine, and they learn about the amazing rivers that we have. And so they're making some conclusions about, noticing that all the rivers flow into the ocean, and they're starting to think about, what would this have been useful for? And so they start to think about transportation and fishing and, wow, if somebody was way up there in Maine, you can get all the way down to the ocean, which is exactly how the Wabanaki people used our rivers. And then we sort of flip the script and we talk about what happened with colonization and how the area in Portland, Casco Bay, which was a vital source of food and other materials for the Wabanaki people, what would have changed. And so then we really get into connecting back to salmon and our Atlantic salmon population. And, we move forward to looking at how rivers have changed. And there's a river right near our school that has a dam. And so we talk about that. We learn about a dam that was removed in Orono, which was really celebrated by the Penobscot Nation. And it's just really powerful to see the students then learn how the decisions that are made can impact so many different people, living creatures, and to see how removing that dam made a big difference as well. And then they also learn about the use of resources. So in order to fish and have something to hold the salmon, the Wabanaki people made these beautiful baskets, and it's still a very important part of culture today. And so we learn about the baskets, and we learn about the ash trees, and then we also learn about the emerald ash borer, which is threatening the ash trees. And so there's this layer of science and just discovery about the different resources that we have in Maine. And I actually had a student that for teacher appreciation, tried to ask his mom to find ash tree seeds for me, because he knew that I really was passionate about the ash trees and was concerned, and that it would make me happy if we could plant more ash trees. And she's like, but I couldn't find any seeds. So it's just really a process of reading primary documents, looking back through the history and imagining what it would be like and how things would change based on different periods of time.
That's awesome. There's so much cross-curricular integration there, which I love. So when the students are actively working through this content, what is your main role in facilitating their success?
It is really providing the opportunity for them to read material, to be able to discuss together, and to create an environment where they're thinking and talking and sharing and having just really engaging activities to be able to, like the map activity, to be able to share their thinking. And then at the end, they get to cap it off with something, a project of their choice to share their favorite parts. Maybe they want to be a water protector, or maybe they want to be a news reporter and report about a salmon release. So they get to choose, their own way of sharing their knowledge. But it's really just, I'm just providing them with the artifacts, and then helping them ask questions and make inferences and figure out what they're reading about.
So the last one is if you could see this lesson grow into your grandest dreams, right? If you were to kind of give yourself advice for the next time you teach it, what you would change, or possibly an end result that you'd like to expand upon, are there any adjustments you would make?
Absolutely. I would love to be able to um, have a aqua tank in my classroom and actually grow Atlantic salmon and then release them. So that's like something that I'm actually working on to help. So hopefully that will happen. There is a fifth grade teacher, Tanya Prentice from Oxford County. She was the Oxford County Teacher of the Year for Maine, and she does this. So I'm hoping to learn from her and partner with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And the other piece is I would really like to be able to contact some of the Wabanaki artists who are currently crafting baskets that are selling for thousands of dollars, and maybe have a guest speaker. That's something that I've been thinking about for to come in and share their craft, because these baskets are really, really incredible.
I would share.
That's awesome.
I actually had the opportunity to talk, not to that specific tribe, but I have a local tribe and someone who's willing, and it is wild to just see the amount of respect kids have. So I highly suggest if you can make that happen. Just a cool opportunity, and the idea of giving back. Just a side note, I'm not sure if you're familiar with there's a book called Milestones that goes through every grade level and talks about traditional characteristics of the kids. And it's probably one of the best gifts I ever got from my principal, to kind of say what are natural positives and negatives of boys and girls at these levels. And I think one really cool thing about teaching fourth grade, we may be biased, is everything's applicable to the world around your kids. So it doesn't feel like you're isolating ELA, math, science, social studies very often, because whether you're talking about energy, whether you're talking about tributaries towards the ocean, you can kind of all wrap them together. It's a beautiful thing you're obviously capitalizing on a ton of those resources. Really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I love both of those ideas for a way to advance that. So we're going to jump into our last segment of the show, where we have had a consistent name on this one, Matt. This is our exit ticket. And so it's 4 questions, 2 from both of us. Question number 1 is, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Well, I've already hinted at that, but I think it's just really believing in them, and not just in theory, but in practice, and continually thinking, what message am I giving my students, and making sure that the messages we're giving are moving kids forward in their own self-confidence and their own belief. Because what you want is for your belief to be so strong that it becomes part of their own belief in themselves.
You have hinted at that, but you can say that 20 times.
Leaning into, I know it's difficult to narrow down, but advice, whether it was from a colleague, supervisor, or honestly a student. I know a lot of times there's a few things that run through my mind before my kids come in my classroom as my priorities for the day. What's the best piece of advice or something that always rings true to you that you frequently think about going into a school day?
I think that there is real joy in my classroom because of the way that I share my passions. And I think when I was first starting to teach, I was wanting to be that perfect teacher, and I was like trying to emulate other people's teaching styles and and really what it came back to is that I needed to bring every bit of myself to my classroom, and know that when I do that and I'm my authentic self, the kids respond to that so strongly and powerfully. And, we each have our own passions. We each have our own personalities. Like, I'm not sure, Ken, if you get up on tables and sing and make up songs, but that's what I do and it works. So you just have to find your way through and just be your authentic self and, give you guys have both said this, and I really love how you say, give yourself permission and not always looking to be just like you see this amazing teacher, but like watch them, observe them, and see how their students respond, and then think about yourself and how you can bring those passions to your classroom.
Like, I love that advice. I can't say that I get up on tables and sing and dance. However, I ironically, probably 4 or 5 days ago, I had a high school student who I taught in 5th grade. Hey, Mr. Ehrman, I remember when I was in your class, you were walking around on all the tables teaching us. And I said, well, what was I teaching? She's like, I don't remember, but you were walking around on all the tables for the entire class. So I was almost there. No singing and dancing, but I was up on the tables. So when the school year is going through waves, there's always stressful times for teachers, especially around report cards and conferences. When teachers are in that moment, what is something that you want them to hear to help them power up through that moment of struggle?
I think it's really critical for teachers to have an identified strategy of rejuvenation. And my colleagues all know what mine are. So, sometimes if I'm looking like I need a break, they'll know that sometimes I turn my lights off and I shut my door because I need that little moment of just quiet and dark. And, when the kids are at lunch, and they'll just know that means that she can't have any conversation right now. My other go-to is a nature bath and taking a minute to get outside and have fresh air. And so each day I try and either walk or run. And those are the things that work for me. And so I think it's really critical that when you are in a profession that is really demanding and like you were saying, the ups and downs, like what is your go-to strategy that's going to give you a little bit of a lift? So my room, the dark room is like during the day at school, and the walk is after school. And drinking lots of water is really critical for me. But then, really, truly, aside from that, also have that one colleague that you can really go to and lean upon. And do not ever be afraid of asking for help. It does not mean that you're not doing your job well. It just means that you recognize you need support. And that, to me, is real strength.
So our last question, I want to give you kudos. You do a great job, at least on Twitter, of supporting other educators and highlighting great things going on in Maine, in your classroom, and beyond. What are the best ways for people to continue to learn from you after this interview, to keep up with you? What would be the best way that if they had questions to reach out to you?
Please feel free to email me. It's at Soule, SOULEC, SouleC at portlandschools.org. I was doing my Twitter handle, I'm sorry. So SouleC at portlandschools.org is my email. And I do try and be really active on Twitter. I was new to it when I became Maine Teacher of the Year, and I've really appreciated it from a professional standpoint. So that's at Soule Cindy. So those are two ways that you can reach out.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll link to both of those in the show notes. Our show notes, as always, can be found at powereduup.com. And this is /show 14. Cindy, thank you so much. This has been a blast, our little 4th and 5th grade tribe here, but you brought so much insight, really a ton of practical ways for us to incorporate more literacy in our classroom and incorporate that inquiry-based learning. A lot of ideas for teachers to reflect on it and think how they can apply it to their own classroom, regardless of their content and grade level. And I'm also going to put a little pressure on you. You'll also be able to connect with Cindy on our platform at powereduup.com, because if she's not a member yet, she's going to become a free member. To engage with other educators on our growing forums, which are starting to grow, which is exciting to see. So thank you to our audience as always. Please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you have not. Cindy, thanks again. This was really an honor. It's very clear and evident why you've been selected as the Maine Teacher of the Year. That is quite obvious. So let's get on out of here, Matt.
All right. So as we powered down this episode, Cindy, you've left us feeling extra powered up. Thank you for the time. Everyone, have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time.